Okay, so a little bit about the Research Hub. Like I said, we are here to teach you how. Actually, it's an organization that has been put together to help researchers and students understand the research process. We don't intend carrying out researches for anybody. We only look, or we want to help people understand the process and then provide some guidelines as and when it is needed or it is necessary. So our vision is to help researchers understand the research process. And then we aim at providing lectures from time to time so that those who do not understand any aspect of the research process can join in for some clarification. We will not conduct the researches for anybody. For instance, you will not bring your research, oh, I have to write a process, and then we'll provide guidelines where appropriate. Maybe it comes to your methodology, you are not too sure about what to do, we'll provide some guidelines, and then we'll provide guidance also with the data analysis. Probably you are working on your analysis and then you don't know which analysis, either to do descriptives or inferential analysis, will try and help you with that as well. And then we would also provide guidelines on writing the dissertation and thesis. And then occasionally we provide some reference management software support as well. So it's a rare opportunity to us or for us to have this first master class. And we are excited having you as our first cohort of participants. We are grateful you joined us this morning. We pray that we are going to have a very fruitful discussion. And at the end of the day, we would all be able to meet our expectations. We've looked at your expectations. Some want to understand the research process. People also want to be able to carry out their researches smoothly. Some also want to be able to write their articles smoothly. We hope that by the time this morning's class comes to an end, at least we'll get some knowledge about the research process. And then we'll have subsequent classes. Our next class will be on the 17th of September. And then we'll try to look at literature review, how to write our literature reviews, the different types of literature reviews, and then we'll look at referencing. Because when it comes to literature review, you need to provide sources or references or citations to the documents and articles you are using. So we'll go through how to even collect information for our literature review, how to go about the literature review, how to draw up a literature map to guide us in the process of our writing. And then we'll look at how to avoid plagiarism in writing our literature reviews and then the various components of our research studies. So please, you are welcome to this morning's masterclass. And I'm Antonia Donko. Yes, I'll be taking you through this morning's session. I have other colleagues who will be joining from time to time, but today it's a one-man show. So feel free, let's interact. If you have questions, you can type them in the chat, you can lift your hand. But at the end of the class, at the end of the discussion, we'll have some time to deliberate on all issues that will be raised. So I've given a brief profile of myself. Like I mentioned, I'm Antonia Bernadette Apia, or Mrs. Antonia Bernadette Donko, sorry. And I'm an assistant librarian with the University of Ghana. I work in the BAM library and I head the reference services department. And for my research interest, I do a lot of information management, personal information management, change management, capacity building, social media, etc. By God's grace, I have about 5 articles published in peer-reviewed journals. I have 2 published books. One is on referencing and citation, and the other is on information literacy in academic writing. So how to be able to write consistently. It talks about grammar, use of transitions and the like. And for qualifications, as at now, I hold a PhD in information science. So you're welcome to this morning's class. I think we'll start, and then I'll keep admitting more of our participants as they come in. So this is a little overview I would give you. In some few minutes, we'll start the main class. Thank you very much. I said we teach you how. So for our first master class, we targeted postgraduate students and researchers, but if you have registered, you are welcome. And this morning, our objectives are to introduce each and every one of us to the research process, or to research and its importance. And then at the end of the day, we should understand what research is, and then we should be able to differentiate between the different types of researches. And then we should be also able to understand the components of a research. And then we should understand the various phases when it comes to the research process and their corresponding languages. So our first question for the day is, what is research? What is research? We all do a lot of researches, especially as students. We have to write dissertations, some are writing term papers, some are writing theses, etc. What is research? The term research is coupled from two words, re and search. And re is a prefix, which means again. Okay, so to do something again or to repeat. And then search is to discover, to search for something. So putting the two words together, research means to search again. We come across some researches that have already been carried out, and then we go to search again. Sometimes the research may be in a gray area, which means an area that hasn't been explored, and then we go to search, and then we search again to find out if we can modify some facts or theories, and then at times through research we come out with new facts. And then at the end of the day, you realize that we expand the knowledge in that particular area. So research basically has been divided into two broad groups. We have the physical or the natural science researchers, and then the social or the human science researchers. Now, when we look at the physical or the natural science, they deal with the researches carried out in laboratories. And then most often they are under controlled conditions. So in the laboratory, we can have controlled temperature, and then we can have a controlled, environment. Sometimes lighting is controlled and all of that. And when it comes to these physical researches, the researcher doesn't play so much of a part, or there's no bias in any way. Your ideas cannot influence such researches because they are laboratory based. And so they deal with the physical phenomena, like we go to the hospital, you're going to run a lab test. Those ones are laboratory based. They are trying to find out probably what is wrong with us in our systems. And you realize that whoever is carrying out that search has no influence in the process. If I'm testing for malaria, whoever is doing the test for me cannot influence the results in any way. And then we have the social or the human science researches. These are based on human behavior. Okay, so we try to search probably what is happening in our society. And so factors such as physical factors, social factors, sometimes temperamental factors, psychological factors, and even economic factors can influence these researches. And social researches are most often carried out in communities, or they are carried out in the society. So social research includes the formulation of questions, and then we seek answers to these questions. And like I said, they are mostly about the social world. And so you realize that most often in these researches, we have to set objectives. Sometimes we set hypotheses, and then we try to find answers to these questions or hypotheses we posed. So these social researches are aimed at discovering new facts, or sometimes we can check if probably things have changed. So let's say a research was organized 5 years ago, it can be repeated to find out if the situation has changed. So these are social researches. And to do this or to carry out social researches, we employ the scientific research techniques so that whatever we come out with, we can generalize to the population, because most often these researches, we just pick a sample and then we carry out the researches in that sample. So after the research, we can generalize our findings. And a typical example I put here is exploring a phenomenon that's personal information management, which is something I actually carried out for my PhD. And then it was done to find out how faculty members, for instance, are handling their information, how they are creating, how you categorize information, how you store, how you retrieve information. And then I even went to the extent of finding out if memory in a way influences the information we create and even how we retrieve our information. So you realize that this is something that is carried out in the society. And so we have human beings as our respondents or as our participants. And then we have another type of research. Okay, so these are the broad two main types of research. And then whatever the type of research, either you are doing either the physical research or the social science research. Your research might be either a policy research, it could be an applied research, or a fundamental research. So we are going to find out what a policy research is, what an applied research is, and then what a fundamental research is. So policy research, so trying to understand what it is conducted specifically for its application in real life challenges. And then the findings of such researches influence policy formulations. So you realize that most often, and this is a social science research, so it is carried out in the society, and we realize that at the end of the day, we would bring out some recommendations, which we expect that it is employed or it's used in the formulation of policies to make life or situations better. So these are policy researches. They are used to influence the policies that are put in place in the society. And then we have applied studies or applied researches, and then they are meant to test theories and models on populations. So sometimes it's unfortunate, most often the researches we carry out in school do not reflect or are not used in the improvement of our society and all of that. But if we have done that, you'd have realized that most of our studies would either fall under policy research, they'll fall under applied researches, or they'll fall under fundamental researches. So the validity of such theories and models may have to be tested under conditions, and then after which generalization will be possible. So like I said, we just pick a sample and then you carry out your study. And then because we are using the scientific process, we know everything is being done systematically, so that at the end of the day, we can generalize to an entire population. And then we'll look at fundamental researches. And they are most often original or investigative studies of nature. These are carried out most often in gray areas. If we say gray areas, they are new areas, probably areas of study where so much information has not been generated. So in our new areas or gray areas, we have to carry out fundamental researches to be able to know what exactly is in the field. So in this situation where we have a COVID-19, for instance, which looks like a new virus that is in town, a fundamental research can be conducted so that we get to know more about, let's say, how the virus is affecting humanity or is affecting the society and all that. So fundamental researches are carried out in gray areas or areas where so much information is not available. So the topic, like I said, may be new, could be done in a new topic. So doing the research is to enable us get more information about the research, about the area. And at times too, it helps us throw light on the area. So like I'm talking about COVID-19, for instance, we can conduct some fundamental research to know what is going on in that area. So to give a brief summary of what we have talked about so far, we've tried to explain what research is, and then we've looked at the two broad types of researches, the physical or the natural science research, and the social or the human science research. And I've talked about the fact that irrespective of the kind of research, that is, be it physical or social, your research can be either applied, it can be fundamental. Yes, research can be either applied, it can be fundamental, or it can be for a policy research, that is to influence policy. So I want us to now look at the research process itself. Research process. I want to carry out a research. What are the various components of the research, or how am I going to go about it? What is the process I have to go through to be able to come out with a scientific research, a research that can be used to influence or can be generalized to a population? Okay. So in carrying out a research, the main focus or the main aim of the researcher is to solve problems. So if I want to solve a problem, I first of all need to know that a problem exists. I need to know a problem exists. So the researcher will first of all have to identify a problem in the society, because we are looking at social research. So you have to find out a problem you are going to solve. Okay, and then based on the problem you come out, you need to also identify your objectives or the hypothesis you want to test. And then based on your objectives, you outline the appropriate research methodologies. Okay, and then you find ways of addressing these problems effectively. So if I want to identify a research problem, how do I identify a problem? I want to carry out a study, and I do not know much about the study. How do I carry out the research, or how do I identify a problem? We can identify the problem from the environment, and most often from literature or from previous studies. So for instance, I want to find out, or I want to write a study on, let's say, personal information management behavior. This is something I have thought of, but I also need to consult literature, find out what has already been studied. Okay, I need to find out, is there really, we sit and we think there's a problem, but you go into the literature and you realize there's actually no problem. Just a minute. Just a minute. It seems. Are we together? Sorry, I need to mute a few people here. Pearl, Pearl, please, can I hear you? Are you having a challenge, please? Pearl, are you having a challenge, please? Pearl, if you have a question, can you type? I can see your hand is up. That's why I paused my lecture. Okay, but as I wait for Pearl, let me continue. So like I said, with your research problem, you also need to support it with literature. You see, so you have to go back into the literature, or you try to get some articles that talk about the area in which you want to carry out your study, so that you know what is there. You can be able to identify the gap only when you go into the literature, so that you'll be able to give your research a very good problem to be able to formulate your objectives and all that. Okay, so once the problem is established, once you have been able to identify the gaps where your study is going to fail, you need to set your objectives. And objectives are very, very, very important. If you miss out on the objectives, it makes the work a little difficult. And so the objectives are to outline what the researcher wants to achieve, and they should be achievable. Let's not set objectives that are too difficult to achieve. And then in setting our objectives, for instance, we use words like to examine, to identify, to evaluate, to assess, to explore, etc. And you realize that once your objectives are outlined, the methodology suitable to satisfy the objectives must be identified and used. So our objectives tie into the methodology, and it even ties into the analysis you want to use. So you need to establish your objectives. And then, like I said, keynotes about objectives. Objectives are very, very important because it dictates the kind of methodology you can use. It dictates your research approach. It even dictates the kind of data to be collected. Either you are going to collect numerical data or you are going to collect quantitative data. It's all determined by the objectives, and it also determines the choice of data collection data collection instrument to use. So either you're going to use questionnaires, using interviews, etc. Depends on the objectives you set and the types of questions to even ask. If you are going to use closed-ended or open-ended questions, it depends on the objectives you have formulated for your study. And then the analysis also depends on the objectives, because through the objectives, you derive a certain, you employ certain analysis to be able to derive your findings. So setting the right objective is key in the research process. Once the objectives are set, they are put into questions. In some organizations or some institutions, you have research questions and then objectives as well. And then you can also, through your objectives, formulate your hypothesis to be able to derive some findings for your study. So we are continuing with the research process. Now we have our problem established, we have our objectives set. Sometimes you also need to talk about the purpose of the study, which is the reason why you are carrying out the study. It's quite straightforward. You just state the reason why you want to carry out the study. And then you need to look at the significance of the study. That is the potential benefits of the study and the people it's going to be of benefit to. Sometimes we look at its benefit to policymakers, benefit of your study to researchers, to students, sometimes even to practitioners in the area in which you are carrying out the study. So we look at the literature review. And this is another critical area when it comes to the research process, because your literature review should position your study in the broad or in the general subject area. And then your literature review is also derived from the objectives you set. So the literature review is a review of previous studies, okay, that are closely related to the current study. And then it helps you position your particular study in the broad subject area. And then it helps also to connect the ongoing study to previous dialogues in the literature. And through the literature review, you're also able to identify gaps in the field where your study is going to fail to extend previous studies in the field. And the literature review also serves as a benchmark against which the researcher is going to compare findings, okay, and then also provide justification and basis for your study. So you realize that being able to review literature is also critical to your study. And then the researcher also gets to know more about investigations and perspectives already existing, so that you don't go duplicating what has already been done. Yes, you can duplicate, but it shouldn't be, 100% duplicated. So with you carrying out a literature review, you are able to avoid some of these shortfalls. And then the literature review also helps in offering new ideas, sometimes even in relation to methodology and then the designs or approach you are going to use. At times, reading from the literature, you are able to find out the new things you can bring on board. I skipped one slide, which is originality. Originality is very important when it comes to looking at how novel your study is, or what your study is going to contribute to the discourse or to the general or the broader subject area. And we can look at originality when it comes to methods. Sometimes you are carrying out a study and you realize everyone is using, let's say, quantitative methods or quantitative approach. You can decide, okay, let me try it this time using the qualitative approach, or let me do a mixed method study. At the end of the day, you realize that you have brought in some originality. And then originality also can come or can be made evident through your data collection tools. Probably it's the general or the norm has been to do quantitative, so everybody is using questionnaires. You can decide, okay, let me do a mixed method study. So I do a little bit of qualitative study and then you add the quantitative. And then also you can be novel, or you can bring in originality when it comes to data analysis. And then through the objectives, you outline some strategies to help you provide answers or solutions to your problem. And then based on the worldview, or based on the paradigms and all of that, you decide on the research approach to use. So either you are going to use quantitative research approach, or you are using the qualitative, or you are using the mixed methods approach. And these approaches will go into detail in our next meetings, in subsequent meetings. Okay. So methodology relates to the processes employed in the research. And then these are processes, they could be either inductive or deductive, or we could have a combination of both in a single study. And like I said, based on the paradigm, it could be either a quantitative, we could have a qualitative study, or we can have a combination of qualitative and quantitative aspects. That's the research methods. And in using the research methods, you would also have to decide which is coming in first. Either I'm going to carry out the quantitative aspects first, or I'm going to carry out the qualitative aspect first. All these we would look at in our subsequent classes. So we'll look at research design. If I say the research design or research approach, what does it mean? What is it? It is the set of procedures that guide the researcher in the process of inquiry. So the things I want to do, and like I said, it is the overall plan that will connect the problem you have identified to empirical research. Okay, and we talked about the systematic or the scientific approach. So it is the research that is going to help you, the design, sorry, that is going to help you to carry out that scientific or systematic process in finding solutions to the questions or the problem you have identified. And then the research design also allows the researcher to draw conclusions about relationships when it comes to the variables you have established in your study. And these would go into in detail in our next classes or in our future classes. And then the initial decision involves the selection of different approaches and then methods. And then it also determines the kind of data we are going to collect. And then it would also determine if we are even going to run the kind of analysis we are going to run on our data and all that. And then it could be, like I've already said, it could be quantitative research design, it could be a qualitative approach, or we can use the mixed methods approach into finding answers or solutions to the questions we outline from the onset of the research study. So we would look into detail the components of the quantitative, qualitative, and then research, and the mixed methods research approach. But that's not for today. In the future classes, we'll look at all that. So we would also have to decide on the population and the sampling or the sample you are going to use in carrying out your study. And so what's the population? The population is the entire aggregate or aggregation of a study element. So let's say I want to carry out a study and my population is University of Ghana. So the population is the broader group from which a sample will be drawn. Okay, because I won't be able to study, let's say if I'm studying faculty members, University of Ghana, there are so many, I may not be able to study everybody. So from that population, I need to draw out a sample, and that sample should be drawn systematically. And so therefore, you also need to use appropriate techniques to be able to draw your sample so that at the end of the day, you can generalize. And then we'll look at these sampling techniques in future classes that will be organized. And I've also indicated that the population can be homogeneous or heterogeneous. Homogeneous meaning that they might have, let's say they have the same characteristics. So if I want to look at faculty, I can look at faculty from a homogeneous perspective or from a heterogeneous perspective. If we talk about heterogeneous, it means there are diverse or there are differences among them. But if you talk about a homogeneous population, then it means you are drawing on a characteristic that runs through the entire population. So you have your population, which is the entire study element out of which you draw your sample. And so drawing out the sample, the process of drawing out the sample is what is determined as sampling. And we know that sometimes you even need to justify the sample you have drawn. And so we would look at all of that, how to even justify, okay, I decided to take 10% of the entire population. Well, why or what makes you take 10%? We will look at all of that in our future engagement. And then we look at data collection methods and instruments. Data collection methods. I have identified a problem. I have identified a steady population. I've been able to collect my sample. I've been able to determine my samples. Sorry, now I need to collect data. How am I going to collect data? What methods am I going to use? What instruments am I going to use? You need to determine all of these. And like I said, all of these will run from the objectives you have set. Because if I set objectives and the study is going to be a quantitative study, then I need to look at using a quantitative or an instrument that satisfies the kind of data I'll be collecting. So if I want to collect quantitative data, I need a quantitative instrument. If I want to collect numerical data, or if I want to collect qualitative data, I need to use an instrument that would support that. So what are these instruments? We have questionnaires, we have interviews, we have observations. So if I'm collecting, let's say, quantitative data, then I need to use a questionnaire. But if I want to collect qualitative data, I would have to use an interview or probably observation. And so all of these would go into details in our future engagements, because even in designing the questionnaire, am I going to use open-ended questions? Am I going to use closed-ended questions? It's all determined by the objectives you set. So these are some of the data collection tools we have. So we look at instrumentation. It's just the process of collecting data, okay? And then it refers to the selection or design of the instrument, and then the conditions under which the instruments are administered. And then you need to pre-test your instrument before you administer. So let's say I want to collect quantitative data, and so I have designed a questionnaire to do that. I need to pre-test my questionnaire. I need to administer the questionnaire to a group, and that group needs to be outside my population and outside my sample. And then you are pre-testing to find out if the questionnaire will collect the kind of data you want. If the people going to use the questionnaire would also even be able to understand what you want, so that when you go into the field proper and you're administering your questionnaire, you'll be able to collect the right information or data you need. So it is very, very critical you pre-test your instrument. Even if you are doing an interview, you can pre-test your interview schedule, or it could be a structured interview or a semi-structured interview schedule. You need to pre-test so that you know that if I go to my sample, if I go to my respondents or my interviewees, I'll be able to collect exactly what I need to collect. So those are the instruments we would use. And then you also need to determine the validity and the reliability of your instruments. And these would also be dealt with in subsequent studies or classes that will be organized. And then validity refers to the extent to which your instrument will measure what you are, or what you have determined or you are determined to measure. And so there are different types of validities. You can subject your instrument to. You can do the phase validity, you can do a content validity, and then we can have even the construct related validity. We'll look at all these in the future. And then reliability also refers to how consistent or consistently your instrument will measure what you want to measure. And then when your instrument is reliable, you'll be able to generate consistent results, so that if I even administer, let's say, my questionnaire in Legon, it should give me consistent results when I go to use the same instrument in, let's say, UPSA or even in Nigeria, wherever. I should at least get some consistent results. So that is why we look at reliability and the validity of our instruments. And then when we look at data collection, there are four main ways in which we can collect our data. There are four, especially if it's in a survey. You can either use a mail, you can send your questionnaire, sometimes even an interview schedule. You can send it through mail. You can conduct your interview on phone. You can have face-to-face interviews, and you can even administer your instrument directly to a group. So let's say you go to a lecture hall or to an office and your respondents are there. You can easily administer your instruments to them. So that is the data collection methods, and then we'll look at that in detail as well. Okay, so we'll look at our next subtopic will be the analysis of data. And then we are analyzing the data to be able to make sense of the data we have collected. Because at the end of the day, let's say I've administered my questionnaires, I'll have so many responses from different people. I need to group them or bring them together to make some sense, to be able to draw out my findings for my study. So there are different types of analysis we can conduct. If you collect quantitative data, you can use SPSS to analyze your data, and then we'll look at how to even do the coding and how to go about using SPSS in classes to come in future. And using SPSS, you can conduct either descriptive or inferential analysis. Okay. And then descriptive analysis looks at organizing and summarizing information to make it intelligible. And most often we use tables, we use charts in representing or presenting the data that has been collected or that has been analyzed. Sorry. Okay. And then we can run some inferential statistics as well. There can be some inferential statistics too. If you even use SPSS, you can do that. If you are running some hypothesis, you can be able to do that, and then it gives you good relationships. You're able to come out with relationships among your variables. And then at the end of the day, you are able to generalize from your sample to the population because you have used the systematic method. You have carried out your study in a scientific or in a systematic way. And then if you collect quantitative data, you can also use thematic content analysis in analyzing your data. These days, there are several softwares that can analyze your data for you. And then you would have to do your discussions and the like. And so I'd like to look at research ethics. These are the standards we need to put in place when carrying out our studies so that at the end of the day, we don't go infringing on people's rights because we are carrying out our studies. We have to do the right thing to be able to come out with good works or good researches. So we look at the right way of carrying out researches when it comes to research ethics. We don't need to be biased. You don't have to influence the research you are carrying out in any way. Your ideas should not interfere with the study you are carrying out. And so sometimes we look at anonymity and confidentiality. Your respondents and interviewees should be confident, or they should know that the information you are collecting is not going to be used for any other thing other than the study you are carrying out. And sometimes you need to seek permission from institutions to collect data, and then you need to acknowledge duly the scholarly articles you use. We can't just go about picking people's information and passing it off as if they are ours. So you need to acknowledge duly. And then that goes into our next class where we are going to look at a literature review. We look at avoiding plagiarism, how you are going to do your referencing and citation. And these days, fortunately, there are softwares. So we would also take our participants through the use of some softwares to make our work easy. And then almost to the last aspect of our research process, you need to sometimes elaborate on the problems encountered so that if other people are going into the research area, they would know how to go about it they'll know how to go about it. And so we look at some of the challenges you face in writing or in going through the research. And these could be challenges faced during data collection, challenges faced gaining admission into the place where you want to collect your data. Sometimes you face challenges even accessing information, and then at times there are financial constraints. You can also bring them up. Okay, before I end or bring my discussion to a close, I mentioned in the objectives of the study that, objectives of today's class, that we'll look at one objective. We said we understand the research process and the corresponding languages. Yes, when you look at the research process, you realize that at times, especially if you are a student, you would have to write a research proposal, which will be accepted, and then you move into the research proper. So those are the two phases, if I would want to put them. So we have the proposal phase and then the dissertation or the thesis phase. And at the proposal phase, because you are proposing what you want to do, you use the future tense. Are we okay? And then when it comes to the research proper, because you have carried it out in writing your research report, you can use the past tense. But these will go into detail in the near future. So these are a little, or just a few, I'm seeing some questions coming up. I'll attend to them very soon. So these are a few of the materials I used for this morning's discussion. Like I said, we need to provide references to whatever we say, because most of the information we use do not belong to us, and then we would go through referencing in future. So I'd want to thank you so much for joining us for this morning's session, our first masterclass. We are grateful for your audience. Please, questions? Yes, we can unmute ourselves and then we can ask questions. Let's feel free to discuss. We are all here to learn, to make research interesting for all of us. So please, if you have any question,